Okay, now we jump into our gospel reading, which comes from Luke chapter 14, verse 1, and then verses 7 through 14. On a Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. He told a parable to those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest than you may have been invited by him, and the host who invited both of you may approach you and say, "Give your place to this man," and then you would proceed with embarrassment to take the lowest place. Rather, when you are invited, go and take the lowest place, so that when the host comes to you, he may say, "My friend, move up to a higher position." Then you will enjoy the esteem of your companions at the table. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Then he said to the host who invited him, "When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back and you have repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." Okay, this is actually, I think, one of Jesus' most challenging things that he says. It maybe doesn't seem challenging. Maybe it does to you, actually. Maybe you caught on right away. But anyway, let's talk about it. Okay, so Jesus on a Sabbath. So it's like Saturday. It's a day for rest. So he goes to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees. So the Pharisees are one of the religious sects. There were like three main sects. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. The Pharisees were the biggest of them. They were the most popular. And they were understood to be a pious group of people. I know that in the Gospels, the Pharisees get a bad rap a lot of times, but the Pharisees at the time of Jesus were highly respected by Jewish people. And they were known to be pious. They were known to be faithful observers of the law, which is pretty important. It's something that we tend to emphasize, that we should follow God's laws, St. Paul was a Pharisee, for example. And anyway, of course, when we're in Christ, the law becomes different. What we mean by the law becomes different. But nonetheless, the Pharisees were this large group of people, and they're favored among the Jewish people. People had high regard for them. Okay, so then what happens? The people there were observing him carefully. This, I think, is just a worthwhile thing for our consideration, our reflection. So many times in the Gospels, you see that the enemies of Jesus are watching him closely to see what he's going to do, to hear what he's going to say. They're closely paying attention to. They want to trap him, but the point is that they're like, even his enemies are watching him closely. And if his enemies are watching him closely, wouldn't it make sense for his friends to also watch him closely, to also be so attentive to what he says and what he does, and the way that he says it and the way that he does it, to be super attentive? They're watching him carefully to try to catch him in something. We want to watch him carefully so that we can imitate him and become like him. So then there's this jump, and in between the jump, Jesus heals somebody on the Sabbath, which gets gets him into some hot water, I suppose. And that happens a lot of times in the Gospels, where Jesus does good works of mercy on the Sabbath, and the Jewish people, they're like, you shouldn't be doing any work on the Sabbath. So there's like a difference of interpretation of the law, and Jesus, of course, is God, and so it's like, well, we should probably follow what his interpretation is, So there's that. But then from there, he tells a parable to those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. So this is like an interesting thing, because we think of a parable and we think of like, okay, Jesus is going to tell this like fictional story that has this maybe lesson or this take-home theme for me to have. But here it says it's a parable, and he's talking to them directly about what they're doing. And so it's just like, this doesn't really fit into my typical category of parable. And so maybe it just helps us to understand that a parable is much more than just a story, that sometimes a parable can be used to like bring an image to mind that is maybe a real life image, and so it's more expansive than just a little story that is make-believe or fictional, but instead it can include real life things. And sometimes we see other times in the Gospels where parables are kind of short. They're just like a couple of lines long. So anyway, so this is an example of a parable. He says, when you're invited by someone to a wedding banquet, so that's an important thing. Why is it important? Because we know that there are times in the Gospels where Jesus speaks about a banquet, and in speaking about a wedding banquet, he talks about heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like a wedding banquet. Matthew 22, for example, I just shared this with my people because I was talking to them about coming to the Mass as though you're coming to the wedding banquet of God on this side of heaven. That's what the Mass is. So Matthew 22, verses 1 through 14, this is the kingdom of heaven is like a wedding banquet that the king threw for his son, this great party. So it's interesting that Jesus is talking about a wedding banquet because there are times in the Gospels where the wedding banquet is referring to the kingdom of heaven. It's not necessarily the case that he's talking about that here, but it's just an interesting image that he likes to reuse or use over and over again. Okay, so when you're invited to this wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. So we could say like the first seat. You know, we know this, that a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times at weddings, there are tables that are reserved for, you know, like for family, for the parents of the bride and the groom and the grandparents and maybe siblings. There's of course the head table for the bride and the groom themselves with their wedding party. And so Jesus is like, when you're invited to a wedding party, a wedding banquet, don't go to the first seat or the tables of honor where there is reserved seating. Don't go to those spots, because what might happen is that there might be other people invited who are of higher status than you are, and then you're going to be embarrassed because you were presuming in your pride to be the most important or one of the most important people there, when in reality there was a reality at play that you didn't fully grasp or fully understand. So this is like our connection with our first reading, which is the humility that we have to have of like, I can't fully grasp a situation. There are marvels that are beyond me. There are realities that are too sublime for my strength, for my ability to understand them. And so in humility, I want to not presume to take control of any given situation. But instead, I want to, according to what Jesus is saying here, I actually want to take a lower place. I want to lower myself. Because if I lift myself up, presuming to know fully the situation at hand, and then it's revealed that I don't actually know it, whether it's like this actual literal thing that's taking place here where I sat in a spot that is actually for somebody else who's of higher rank than I am, or whether this is like a figurative thing, which is that I've presumed to take control or to claim that I fully grasp a situation and I don't actually grasp it. Either case, there is embarrassment that follows when the deeper reality is revealed to me and I have to backtrack. I have to retreat and kind of put myself, be put in a lower position than I thought that I was worthy of. So that's the connection is pretty strong, of course, between humility and just lowering ourselves rather than seeking to lift ourselves up and presume to be the most important people around. This is a difficulty for lots of people. And so anyway, so then he gives this whole thing of like the one is, and so like just imagine the host, you know, like at least where I live in the Midwest, if we're in a situation like this where it's like I have to tell that person that someone more important than him is here, and so I have to tell him to like that. I feel bad about that. I don't know that God necessarily would feel bad about that, or that for that matter, all people, like I'm sure people living in different parts of the country wouldn't feel as bad about it. But at least where I live, that's a common thing that we actually like. I feel bad about having to put somebody in their place, and yet I have to put somebody in their place if this is the case, that I'm actually want to honor this thing, or I want to reveal the full reality that is at play here. I need to actually. So in some ways, it's like when I'm lifting myself up, I'm not just putting myself in a position where I might be embarrassed, but I'm actually putting other people possibly in a situation where they might be embarrassed by having to tell me and embarrass me of the full reality at play. Which is just not a great place that I want to be or that I want to put other people into, you know? So that's why he says, so rather, when you're invited, go and take the lowest place so that when the host comes to you, he may say, my friend, move up to a higher. So then you're going to be the one who's lifted up. So this again gets back to this, like if I want to be great in the sight of God, if I want to be great in the kingdom of heaven at the wedding feast of the Lamb, then it's not that I need to puff myself up and become somebody, but it's actually that I need to lower myself. And in lowering myself, the Lord can make something of me. And he might not make something of me on earth, actually. So sometimes people might want to like try to manipulate this by saying like, okay, I'm going to lower myself so that secretly my desire to be great is going to be known to all people because I'm so humble, I'm so lowly that the Lord is going to do something great for me. It's not necessarily that case. Sometimes the Lord does that where people, they're just honest and sincere and they're seeking to be humble, that the Lord can actually lift them up and elevate them and highlight their goodness for other people to grasp and to seek to imitate. But sometimes the Lord just lets people stay in a lowly state. and the greatness that he's going to make of them is not for this earth, but it's for the kingdom. It's for the wedding banquet, actually. And so that I think is just, again, it's like if we lower ourselves and we just keep waiting, like I'm just waiting for my day, I'm just waiting for my time to shine in the spotlight, but I'm gonna stay low because I'm gonna let God do that when He wants to do it. And then it never happens. There's a temptation that I could become resentful of the whole thing, that I could become resentful of God. And it's like, no, I need to like sincerely believe that this is the best thing for me, to lower myself. And if God chooses to elevate me in status, in social standing, in whatever, in resources, if He chooses to do that, then it's because He sees in me someone who's going to use that well. But if He doesn't, it doesn't mean He thinks less of me, but it actually thinks that He's just reserving my greatness, my glory for His kingdom, for His wedding banquet, so that all of the saints together can share in the glory of heaven with the Lord. So anyway, just a word of warning about that, of like, I think, again, it can be easy to say like, oh yeah, I got to lower myself, but it can also be possibly a temptation for some people to feel like we can manipulate the situation so that like this is my path to worldly glory. And it's like, no, like there's no set path for worldly glory. That is for the Lord to lift people up. And if we seek to attain it ourselves, then we're putting ourselves in a really dangerous position, actually, to be put in our place. And again, not everyone who lifts themselves up, it ends up being put in their place on this earth. They might be put in their place later on, after death. And that's for the Lord to figure all of that stuff out. It's not for us to decide who goes where and how things work out, but it is for the Lord to figure out who goes where and how it needs to be worked out. Okay, so then he gets into this really challenging thing. Okay, so actually, let's finish this. So everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. So this is like the punchline of the whole parable. This is called the nimshal, which is just like that whole thing of like, this is the point of the parable. This is the take-home point of like, okay, if I want to be exalted, I actually need to humble myself. And if I want to be humbled, then I can exalt myself here on earth. But anyway, everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Okay, then he shifts to another parable where he talks directly to the host, and this is where it gets really challenging. He said to the host who invited him, when you hold at lunch or dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back and you have repayment. That is so challenging. Because when I throw a party, who are the people that I want to invite? Of course, it's my friends and my relatives and my neighbors. Whether they're wealthy or not, that's not necessarily of my concern. But it's like because like they're the people that I love, that I have affection for, that I live my life with. And so Jesus is like, don't invite them because you may have repayment. But rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed, because of their inability to repay you. Blessed are you going to be. This is like, oh man, that's really challenging. And then he says, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So again, this gets to the point of like alms atones for sins, giving alms atones for sins. So the whole thing of like, when you give alms to the poor, it is like giving a loan to God. The book of Proverbs says that. I forget what chapter and verse, but it says giving to the poor is like making a loan to God. You are lending to the Lord. And so at the resurrection, he will repay you. And so I think here, maybe I'm just saying this because I want it to be this way, but I think here he's not absolutely prohibiting throwing parties and inviting your friends and all that stuff. But I think the point he's making is that if and when you do that, you throw a party and you invite all these people, you're not gaining for yourself any sort of reward, as you would if you threw a party only for those who couldn't repay you. If you threw that kind of a party and just like lavished your resources upon them to honor them, to lift them up, then the Lord says, this is where you will be repaid, because you are gaining for yourself an honor that cannot be paid back in this life. It can't be, because these people can't afford it. And it's not that they're less people, it's just that they don't have the resources that other people have. And so this, I think, is what Jesus is getting at. So it's not a prohibition on having parties and inviting your friends and your family, but it is him saying, like, look, if you do this and at the party you just feel like, man, this is so great, I'm just so glad that I did this, that's great. But don't expect this to be brought up in your final judgment. Don't expect this to be like, yeah, this is the reason that you're getting into heaven, is because you had this great party with all these wealthy people or all these close relations with you that you had. So anyways, maybe that's challenging. Maybe it's not challenging. I don't know. Maybe it's letting off on the gas pedal a little bit. But the point here, again, is just to reiterate what we said in our first reading, which is that giving alms atones for sins, which again is like not necessarily getting into earning our salvation or losing our salvation, but it is to say that there's something that when we are in God's grace, when we give alms, when we are generous with those who cannot be generous back to us, there is something of a reward that is promised by Jesus himself and by the Old Testament too. So what does that mean exactly? I don't know. Maybe it increases our capacity to be filled up with heaven. I don't really know. But the Bible is clear that there is a reward for those who are generous with those who cannot be generous back. What a gift that we're invited into this mystery to contemplate and to reflect on. Beautiful. Okay, we're continuing Hebrews 12. I love Hebrews 12, so we just keep on walking through that in our next reading. I'll see you soon. Peace.